She didn't even look at Nia when she said it. That was the part that cut deepest. Hanmira straightened her blazer, checked her reflection in the glass door of the executive lounge, and spoke the words the way someone might comment on the weather. Flat, certain, already bored by the conversation. You're not the kind of woman a man like him marries. Nia stood there with 14 months of sleepless nights stitched into the clothes on her back, with calluses on her fingers from needles and thread, with a heart that had survived New York chewing her up and spitting her out. And for one terrible moment, she believed every word. Because the worst lies are the ones that sound like things you've already told yourself in the dark. If someone looked you in the eye and told you that you didn't belong, not in the room, not in the relationship, not in the life you'd spent everything building, what would you do? Would you walk away? Or would you stay and make them watch you prove them wrong? That's exactly the question Nia Holloway had to answer, and the answer changed everything. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this channel is where we tell the stories nobody else is brave enough to finish. Drop your city and your country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it moves you, hit that like button. Every single one matters. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning, PA. The flight from Chicago had taken 14 hours, and Nia had spent most of it wide awake, staring at the seat back in front of her with her carry-on bag wedged between her feet like something she didn't trust to the overhead bin. Which she didn't. Inside that bag were the pattern cards, the fabric swatches, and the 3-inch binder she'd been building for 2 years. The portfolio that was supposed to be her second chance. Her first chance had been New York. She didn't like thinking about New York. She'd arrived at Incheon International at 6 in the morning, Seoul time, and the city had been wrapped in a gray fog that made everything look like a painting someone hadn't finished yet. She'd taken the train into the city instead of a cab because the train was cheaper, and even with the Seoul group covering her accommodations, she was still moving through the world the way she always had, counting every expense, knowing exactly how much runway she had left. The answer, if anyone was asking, was not much. The hotel was nicer than anything she'd ever stayed in. High ceilings, white linens that felt like being wrapped in something that had never known hardship. She'd stood in the middle of the room for a full 60 seconds just looking at it before she set her bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, and let herself feel the weight of what she was doing. She had 14 pieces, 14 handcrafted couture garments she'd made over the course of 18 months in the back room of a rented studio in Chicago's South Side, working nights and weekends while she held down a day job at a dry cleaner's to keep the lights on. 14 pieces that represented a specific vision she had never once been willing to dilute, even when every person in her professional life had told her to. And she was about to walk into one of the most powerful fashion conglomerates in Asia and ask them to believe in it. The meeting was at 2 o'clock. At 1:45, she was standing in the lobby of the Seoul Group's headquarters building, wearing the one dress she'd brought that she considered professional without being apologetic, a deep burgundy wrap with structured shoulders and a skirt that moved when she walked. She'd made it herself, obviously. She'd hemmed it the night before in her hotel room with a travel sewing kit she kept in her toiletries bag the way other women kept aspirin. The receptionist was young, Korean, and very polished. She looked at Nia the way people sometimes did, a half-second of visible recalibration, something behind the eyes that adjusted before the professional smile clicked back into place. "Miss Holloway," she said in English that was nearly perfect. "Please follow me." Conference room on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a stretch of the Han River that glittered even under the gray sky. There were 4 people already seated at the table, 2 men in dark suits whose names she would later struggle to keep straight, a woman in her late 40s with reading glasses on a beaded chain who turned out to be the head of acquisitions, and a man at the far end who was not introduced until everyone else had been. He was younger than she'd expected from someone with his title. Executive director was a phrase that conjured a certain image, older, silver-haired, the kind of man who had learned to make rooms feel smaller just by sitting in them. Jun Seo-kang was none of that. He was probably mid-30s, though he had the kind of face that made it difficult to be certain. He was lean and very still, the way some people are still when they're concentrating, except he didn't appear to be concentrating on anything in particular. I was just watching, taking in the room, taking in her. She didn't let herself look at him too long. The presentation lasted 45 minutes. She'd practiced it 200 times, which meant she'd stopped practicing it a week ago because practice had tipped over into performance anxiety, and she knew herself well enough to know that performances made her wooden. So she just talked. She showed them the pieces, photographs first, then the actual garments, which her contact at Seoul had told her she could bring. She explained the construction of each one, the choices she'd made, the references she was working from, and the references she was actively refusing to work from. The acquisitions woman, Park Yuna, her business card would later confirm, leaned forward at a certain point and picked up the photograph of the third piece, a heavily beaded evening jacket with a back panel that Nia had spent 3 weeks on alone, and said something in Korean to the man on her left. She says the technique on the beadwork is unusual, said the translator who'd been sitting quietly at the end of the table, so quietly Nia had almost forgotten he was there. It's a variation of a West African hand embroidery method, Nia said. My grandmother taught me the basic form when I was 8. I've spent the last 15 years trying to figure out how to apply it to couture construction. She paused. I don't think anyone else is doing it quite this way. No, said Yoon Seok-kang. It was the first word he'd spoken in the entire meeting. His English was unhurried and very precise. They're not. Everyone at the table looked at him, the way people look at someone who doesn't often speak in meetings. He wasn't looking at the photograph. He was looking at her. The meeting ended without a decision, which she had expected. She thanked them, collected her materials, and rode the elevator down to the lobby on a complicated cocktail of adrenaline and exhaustion and the particular dread of not knowing which way it was going to fall. She was in a cab back to the hotel when her phone rang. A Korean number she didn't recognize. Ms. Holloway. It was him. She knew it immediately, though she couldn't have said exactly why. I'd like to continue this conversation. Would you be available for dinner this evening? She almost said no. She was tired. She was a mess of nerves, and the hotel bed was genuinely the most comfortable thing she'd ever laid eyes on, and she had eaten nothing since the airport pastry at 6 in the morning. Yes, she said instead. What time? The restaurant he chose was not what she'd expected. It was quiet and not particularly expensive looking from the outside, the kind of place that probably had a 6-month waiting list and no sign on the door. She arrived first and spent 4 minutes wondering if she had the right address before he appeared behind her, apparently on foot, apparently unbothered by the October air. You walked? She said. I live close. He held the door for her. The owner is a friend. Inside it was warm and low lit, and they were seated at a corner table away from everyone else. She got the feeling this was not an accident. The food was extraordinary. She mentioned this twice, and both times he looked pleased in a way that was very contained, just a small shift at the corner of his mouth, like he was allowing it. Can I ask you something? She said, somewhere between the second and third course. Yes? Why me? She said it directly because she was too tired to be strategic. Seoul has access to designers from Paris, New York, Milan, established names, people with track records in PR and the right kind of press. I'm none of those things. So why did you take the meeting? He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, thinking quiet. I read a piece, he said finally, a trade publication 2 years ago, a profile of a designer in New York who had been dropped by 2 major houses for refusing to adjust her sizing standards for their preferred aesthetic. The journalist wasn't sympathetic. The piece was intended to read as a cautionary tale about stubbornness. He looked at her. I found it remarkable that someone with so much to lose was so unwilling to lose it on anyone else's terms. She stared at him. You read that article 2 years ago. Yes, and you remembered it. I remember things that seem important, he said simply. She should have asked what made her seem important. She didn't. She was afraid of the answer, and also afraid of what she might say back to it. They talked for 3 hours. Not about business. About the industry, yes, but also about what the industry was missing, what it kept pretending didn't exist, which markets it kept choosing to ignore and why. She found herself talking the way she only talked with her best friend Destiny back in Chicago, fast and freely, and without editing herself mid-sentence. She said things she normally kept careful about saying in professional settings. He listened the way very few people listened, which was not politely but actually, with the kind of attention that made you feel like the words you were saying were being taken somewhere and kept. He walked her back to her hotel, which was 20 minutes from the restaurant on foot. She didn't ask how he knew the direction. At the entrance, she stopped. This was, she started. I don't know what this was exactly. A beginning, he said. He didn't make it sound like a line. He made it sound like a fact he'd already quietly confirmed. She slept better than she had in months. 3 days later, Seoul Group offered her a funding package that was significantly larger than anything she had dared to imagine. Her own fashion house, her own creative direction, full ownership of her intellectual property. They would be silent partners, investors, not owners. She read the contract 3 times. Then she called her sister in Chicago and made her read it too. Nia, her sister said, take the deal. Something feels, take the deal. She took the deal. What she did not know yet was that the funding had been structured the way it had, protected, clean, insulated from the parent company's other interests, specifically at Jun Seok's instruction. She would not learn this for several weeks. By then, several other things would also have happened. The weeks that followed moved in a shape she hadn't anticipated. She had expected to be alone in the city, working, grinding, slowly building something from the ground up, the way she always had. Instead, she found herself folded, gradually and almost imperceptibly, into something larger. Jun Seok checked in every few days. Not hovering, he was far too measured for that. He would ask a specific question about how the studio build-out was going, or send a contact name, or flag something in a trade report he thought she should be aware of. It was precise and useful, and somehow never felt like oversight. And then sometimes, in the evenings, he would call and ask if she wanted to walk. They walked along the Han River more times than she could count. It was cold, getting colder as October turned toward November, and they walked anyway. He knew parts of the city the way you only know a place you've genuinely lived in, not just occupied. He told her things, not confessions, just context. How he'd spent his 20s trying to understand what his inheritance actually meant. How his mother had pushed him toward the arts before the family business had pulled him somewhere else entirely. How he sometimes thought about what he would have built if he had been free to choose. "What would you have built?" she asked once. He didn't answer immediately. The river moved beside them, black and glittering. "Something that lasted," he said eventually. "Something that wasn't contingent on the next thing going right." She understood that more than she wanted to admit. She told him about New York, the full version, not the polished summary she gave to journalists and interviewers, but the actual experience. The first house that had hired her out of design school, the creative director who had loved her work until the moment it became commercially inconvenient, the public presentation where she'd overheard 2 editors discussing whether someone who looked like her could really be the face of a luxury label. She told him about the second house, which had been kinder at first before turning cruel in more sophisticated ways. She told him about the years she'd spent trying to make herself smaller, not just physically, but in every way, shrinking her vision, softening her edges, being easier to place in whatever box was already built, and waiting. "And then I stopped," she said. They'd paused at a railing above the water. The lights of the city were everywhere. "I just stopped. I thought, what's the absolute worst that happens if I stop trying to be what they want? And the answer was that I lose everything I hadn't actually built yet anyway." She let out a breath. "So I went home to Chicago, and I built the collection that was true, and I figured I'd submit it to every opportunity I could find until someone said yes or I ran out of runway." "And we were the yes," he said. "You were the yes." He was looking at her with an expression she didn't entirely know how to read. Careful. Considering. Something underneath it that was less careful. "Nia." He said her name the way people say names when they're not using it to get someone's attention, but just holding it, like they want to know how it feels. She looked at him. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think what you built is extraordinary, and I think you knew that, even when they told you otherwise." She had been told kind things by professionals before. Compliments were currency in the fashion world. Cheap, easily spent, rarely meant. This did not feel like that. It felt like someone saying something true because it was true, and for no other reason. She did not cry. She was not someone who cried easily. But she had to look away, back at the river, until the feeling passed. Hanmira first appeared at the edge of Nia's awareness, the way bad weather appears on the horizon. Not yet, not quite, but unmistakably coming. She was a senior executive at Seoul Group, lithe and impeccably dressed in the particular armor of someone who had fought for every inch of a room and intended to keep it. She and Jun Seok had a professional history that went back over a decade, which Nia learned from a junior assistant who mentioned it with the careful neutrality of someone who knew much more than they were saying. The first time Hanmira spoke to Nia directly, it was at a company event, a product showcase in one of Seojin's showrooms, the kind of event Nia wouldn't normally attend except that she'd been encouraged to network while she was building her label's presence in the city. She was standing near the drinks table when Mira appeared beside her, champagne glass already in hand, and looked her up and down with the unhurried thoroughness of someone performing an appraisal. "You're the American designer," Mira said, in English. She didn't offer her name. "Nia Holloway," Nia said. "Yes." Mira's gaze drifted across the room toward where Jun Seok stood in conversation with two other executives. It came back to Nia. "He finds you interesting." "I hope so. He's invested in my company." Something changed in Mira's expression, too controlled to call a flinch, but close. "You misunderstand what I mean," she said. Then she moved away. Nia stood there with her drink and thought about it for a long time. The second time, it was outside a board meeting Nia had been invited to attend as a courtesy. Mira was leaving as Nia arrived. They nearly collided in the corridor. "Careful," Mira said, steadying the folder she was carrying. She looked at Nia. Then, in a voice so flat and deliberate, it could only have been calculated. "He's going to marry someone from the right family," she said. "That's how it works here. That's how it's always worked. Whatever you think is happening between you." A pause, her eyes moving over Nia in a way that stripped away the dress and the competence and the careful professionalism and left something much more exposed. "That's not what it is." And she walked away. Nia didn't move for a moment. She thought about the river, about his voice saying her name like it meant something, about 3 hours at dinner talking to a man who had listened to her the way no room in New York had ever listened to her. And then she thought about every time a room had looked at her and made a calculation, about the creative director who'd loved her work until it wasn't convenient, about the editors and their whispered appraisals, about the dress she'd sewn for a presentation at 19 years old that the judges had praised for technique while one of them said, under his breath but not under enough, "She'd be quite talented if she were—" He hadn't finished the sentence. He hadn't needed to. "You're not the kind of woman a man like him marries." Hanmira hadn't even looked at her when she said it. That was the part that cut deepest. Because the worst lies are the ones that arrive in the clothing of things you've already survived. The ones that know exactly which scar to press. Nia stood in the corridor outside the boardroom of the Seojin Group, in a city that wasn't hers, with the funding for her entire future resting on decisions still being made behind closed doors, and she felt something she hated feeling. She felt like maybe they were right. Not forever, not all the way down, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to make her hands cold and her breathing shallow and the enormous thing she was building feel, for just a moment, as fragile as it actually was. She did not know yet what she was standing in the middle of. She did not know about the Bayo syndicate. She did not know what the man who walked beside her along the Han River was, behind the carefully measured words and the listening and the way he said her name. She only knew what she felt, which was not nothing, and what they kept telling her, which was that feeling had no business being here. She smoothed her jacket. She squared her shoulders the way her grandmother had taught her, the same grandmother who had taught her the embroidery technique that had put her in this building in the first place. And she walked back in. She walked back into that building like nothing had happened. That was the thing about Nia Holloway that people kept underestimating. She could take a hit in a hallway and walk through a door 30 seconds later looking like she'd just checked her phone. She'd learned that in New York, where showing damage was the same as inviting more of it. You kept your face neutral and your spine straight and you let them wonder. But her hands were cold for the rest of the day. She sat through the tail end of the courtesy presentation, fabric sourcing trends for next fiscal year, nothing that had anything to do with her. And she nodded at the right moments and asked one question that made the presenter visibly pleased, and all the while she was running Hanmira's words through her head the way you run your tongue over a loose tooth. Not because you enjoy the ache, because you can't help checking if it's gotten worse. You're not the kind of woman a man like him marries, flat, certain, already bored. On the way out, she passed Jun Seok's assistant, a compact, serious young man named Yoon, who communicated primarily through precise emails and the occasional two-word text message. He flagged her down in the corridor. "Mr. Kong asks if you have time this afternoon," Yoon said. "He wants to see the studio space you've selected." Nia looked at him. "He wants to see the studio?" "Yes." She thought about Han Mira, about the way the woman had looked at her. Not with cruelty exactly, which would have been easier to dismiss, but with something worse. Pity wrapped in certainty, like she was telling Nia something for her own good. "Tell him 3 o'clock, Nia said. The studio space was in Seoul, a neighborhood that had once been industrial and was now in the middle of becoming something else, which was exactly why she'd chosen it. The building smelled like old concrete and whatever the previous tenants had been cooking. The windows were enormous and faced north, which meant the light was consistent. The floors needed work. The electrical needed more than work. She arrived first and stood in the center of the empty main room, listening to the silence, feeling the particular mix of terror and excitement that she associated with genuinely blank space. She'd felt it before, twice in New York, but those times had been other people's blank space. This was hers. Jun Seok arrived at 3:02. He came alone, which she hadn't expected. No assistant, no translator, no member of his team. Just him in a dark coat, looking around the empty room with an expression that gave away nothing. "The north light is good," he said. "Yes." She watched him walk toward the far wall where she'd taped up a rough sketch of the layout she had in mind. Cutting tables here, fitting area here, the archive space for fabrics along the back wall. "I know it looks like nothing right now. Everything looks like nothing before it doesn't." He was reading the layout sketch. He pointed to the back wall. "Why so much archive space?" "Because I keep everything. Every sample, every failed version. I go back to things. Sometimes a mistake from 18 months ago is the solution for what I'm working on now." He turned to look at her. "That's unusual." "I know." She shrugged, not defensively. "It's how I work." He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was filing something. She was starting to recognize the gesture. It meant he was keeping it, going somewhere with it later. "I spoke to the contractor," she said, moving to practical ground because standing in empty rooms with him made her feel things she wasn't ready to categorize. "He estimates 6 weeks to get this to a functional state. I think 4 if I push him." "Push him," Jun Seok said, without hesitating. "I was going to anyway." Something moved across his expression that was almost amusement. Almost. They walked the space for another 20 minutes, and she showed him the problems and the plans and the 2 structural issues that were going to cost more than she'd budgeted. He listened to all of it without suggesting she scale back. She noticed that. He didn't suggest she do anything smaller, anything safer, anything more appropriate for a debut. When they were back in the center of the room, he stopped. "Nia." The careful tone he got sometimes. The one that meant he was about to say something real. "How are you finding Seoul?" Not the work. Actually finding it. She considered lying, gave it serious consideration, and then abandoned it because lying to people who asked genuine questions was something she'd done enough of. "It's lonely," she said. "I knew it would be. I'm not complaining. I came here knowing I was going to be building something from scratch in a city where I don't speak the language and I don't know anyone." She paused. "It's just lonelier in practice than in theory." "Yes," he said, quietly. Like he knew something about that. She looked at him. "What about you?" "What about me?" "You grew up here. You run a major company here. You presumably have people, but you walk alone by the river at night. You came here today without anyone." She kept her voice even, not accusatory, just curious. "Are you lonely?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she started to think he wasn't going to answer. "I have people," he said carefully. "I don't always have—" He stopped, started again. "The people I have know a version of me that is partial." "Partial," she repeated. "Yes." She didn't push it, but she held it, the way she held things when they seemed like they might matter later. He left at 4:15. She stood in the empty studio after he was gone and made herself a very firm, very rational list of reasons why none of what she was feeling was a good idea. It was a thorough list. She'd made versions of it before, in her life, and like all thorough lists, it did almost nothing to address the actual problem. 2 weeks into the studio build, Han Mira came to see it. Nia hadn't invited her. She found this out when she arrived at 8 in the morning and discovered Mira already inside. The contractor had apparently let her in when she'd identified herself as a Seojin Group senior executive, which technically she was. And technically the Seojin Group was technically a partner in the space. And the contractor didn't know enough about internal politics to understand that technically was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Mira was standing in the middle of the cutting room, examining the layout Nia had pinned to the wall. Not the rough sketch from before, but the detailed revised plan, with fabric selections and color stories, and a rough timeline for the debut collection. Nia stopped in the doorway. "Ms. Han," she said. Even. No warmth, no aggression. Mira didn't turn around immediately. She kept looking at the wall. "You have an interesting instinct for space," she said. "Unconventional." A pause. "For a debut. I'll take that." Now Mira turned. She looked rested and flawless and carried her coffee cup with the ease of someone who moved through spaces feeling entitled to them. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said. "Okay. I'm here because I think someone should tell you certain things directly, rather than allowing you to walk into them uninformed." "You mean like you told me in the hallway?" Nia set her bag down, didn't take her coat off. "That I'm not his type to marry." Mira's expression didn't change. "I meant what I said." "I'm sure you did." Nia looked at her. "What else did you want to tell me directly?" A beat. Something moved through Mira's eyes that was more complicated than simple hostility. Something that might have been frustration. Not at Nia specifically. At a situation she found herself unable to control. "Jun Seok is not a simple man," Mira said. "I noticed." "You noticed the version he wants you to see." She set her coffee down on the edge of the cutting table. "I have known him for 11 years. I know what his family requires of him. I know what he has given up in order to carry what he carries. And I know," she said this part carefully, "that the people who get close to him sometimes find out things they were not prepared to find out." Nia was very still. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mira said, "that when you discover who he actually is, not what he shows you on your river walks, you should have someone to call, someone inside his world who can advise you." A pause. "I'm offering to be that person." The room was quiet except for the sound of the street coming through the old windows. "You're offering to help me," Nia said flatly. "I'm offering to protect you from making an irreversible mistake." "Why?" Mira picked up her coffee. "Because the last woman who got close to him without understanding what she was getting close to." She didn't finish it. She pressed her lips together, put the coffee down again, picked up her bag. "Think about what I said." She left. Nia stood alone in her studio for a while, listening to the sounds of the building coming to life. The contractor's crew arriving below, footsteps on the stairs, the particular metallic sound of the freight elevator she was already in love with. She looked at her wall of plans and timelines and fabric swatches and color stories. She looked at what she was building, the last woman who got close to him. She thought about the way Jun Seok had said partial, about the careful precision with which he chose every word, about how, in all their conversations, he had never once talked about the parts of his life she hadn't asked about. She'd assumed it was privacy. She dealt with private people. She was something of one herself. But privacy and omission were different things. She didn't bring it up the next time she saw him. She told herself it was because she didn't yet know what to bring up, which was true, but also because some part of her was afraid of what bringing it up might collapse. What she did instead was pay more attention. She started noticing small things she'd cataloged without examining. The car that was always nearby when they walked, never obvious, never close, but there. The way certain people changed their posture when Jun Seok entered rooms. Not quite deference, something closer to awareness. The phone calls he excused himself to take, always in Korean, always in another room. The fact that Yoon, his assistant, sometimes seemed less like an assistant and more like someone running logistics for something considerably more complex than a fashion investment. She noticed. She filed. And she kept building her collection, because whatever else was true, that was the thing she could control. The fight, because that's what it was, even if neither of them raised their voice, happened on a Tuesday evening in the 4th week. She'd called him about a sourcing issue, a fabric supplier who was suddenly claiming the material she'd contracted was unavailable, which she was 90% sure was not a coincidence but couldn't yet prove. He'd said he'd look into it. She'd said she could handle it herself. He'd said he knew she could, but that he had a contact. She'd said she didn't always want to need his contacts. There was a pause. "What are we talking about?" he said. "The fabric supplier." "Nia." She pressed her back against the studio wall and looked at the ceiling. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what we're talking about." Another pause. Longer. "Someone said something to you," he said. It wasn't a question. She closed her eyes. "Your senior executive came to my studio uninvited 2 weeks ago." Silence. She said, Nia organized her words. She said the people who get close to you sometimes find out things they weren't prepared to find out. And she said, I should call her when that happened. The silence on his end was a different texture now. She could feel it changing. What else did she say? His voice was level, almost too level. She mentioned a woman, the last woman who got close to you. Nia kept her voice even. She didn't finish the sentence. A long breath on his end. Nia, I'm not asking you to explain your past, she said quickly, because she didn't want this to become about that. I'm asking, and I want you to hear this as a genuine question and not as an accusation. Is there anything about your life that I would need to know in order to make an informed decision about how involved I want to be in it? The silence lasted long enough that she opened her eyes and checked her phone screen to confirm the call was still connected. Yes? He said finally. Just that. Just the one word. She exhaled. Okay, she said. Then I think we need to sit down. Not on the phone, he said. No, she agreed. Not on the phone. They met 2 days later at the same restaurant where they'd had their first dinner. She was there before him again. She ordered water. She looked out the window at the street and tried to decide what she was actually afraid of, and came up with a longer list than was comfortable. He sat down across from her, and he looked tired. She hadn't seen him look tired before, not once. He always looked like someone who had slept adequately and made decisions without visible cost. Tonight there were shadows under his eyes, and something in the set of his jaw that wasn't quite tension, but was adjacent to it. You asked me once, he said, without preamble, what I would have built if I'd been free to choose. I remember. I told you something that lasted. He looked at the table, then back at her. The honest answer is that I would have built something clean. Something that I didn't have to keep quarantined from every other part of my life. He paused. Your company is funded cleanly, Nia, legally separated. Whatever happens, that won't change. That was the condition I set. The condition you set for what? He was quiet. Jun Seok. She kept her voice steady. Not angry yet. Getting there, but not yet. The condition you set for what? For taking over as executive director of the Seoul Group, he said, 4 years ago, when my father died and I inherited everything. A pause. Everything. She looked at him. She waited. The Seoul Group is a legitimate company, he said. It is also connected to other interests. Interests that my father built over 30 years that I did not choose and cannot simply step away from without consequences that extend beyond me. He looked at her steadily. I lead both. The restaurant was quiet around them. Soft music from somewhere. A couple laughing at a table across the room. Both, Nia said. Yes. Connected interests, she said. What does that mean? He held her eyes. It means the Bayo Syndicate, he said. Korea's largest. I know what a syndicate means, she said. The word landed between them and sat there. Her brain was doing several things at once. It was running a fast inventory of everything she knew about him. Every conversation, every careful word, every moment she'd noticed the car, or the posture change, or the phone call in another room. It was doing the math on what this meant for her company, her funding, her name that was just beginning to be attached to something real. And underneath all of that, under the practical calculation, was something rawer and harder to name. A feeling that was part grief and part fury because she'd let herself trust this. She'd let herself open into this carefully and slowly and with more hope than she usually permitted herself. And now, say something, he said, quietly. I'm thinking. Okay. Don't, she said. Tell me it doesn't affect me. Don't tell me the separation protects me. I know what you're going to say, and I need a minute before you say it, because right now I am sitting here, realizing that the man I have been... She stopped, pulled it back. That the man who has been my primary support system in this city is someone I didn't actually know. You know me, he said, and there was something raw in it, something that didn't sound composed at all. I know the part you showed me. That part is real. I'm not saying it isn't. She pressed her fingers flat on the table. I'm saying it's partial. Your word. You said that weeks ago and I held on to it, and now I understand what you meant. He didn't say anything. He looked at her with an expression that was, she didn't have a clean word for it. Not guilt, which would have been simpler. Something more complicated. Something that looked like a person who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just put it down in front of someone for the first time and doesn't know if that was the right thing. She looked at him for a long moment, then she picked up her water glass, took a sip, and set it down. I need time, she said. Yes. I'm not... She stopped, started again, and I'm not making any decisions tonight. I'm not asking you to. She nodded. She picked up her coat and her bag. She stood up. He stood too, automatically, the habit of him. Nia. His voice was very quiet. The collection. Your work. That doesn't change. I know, she said. And she did know. That at least she believed. She walked out into the night air, and it was cold, and she didn't hail a cab immediately. She walked for a while, not toward anything, just moving, because standing still felt impossible. The city moved around her, the lights and the noise and the compressed, busy energy of Seoul at night. And she walked through the middle of it feeling like someone who had just learned that the ground she'd been standing on had always been different from what she walked for 40 minutes before she realized she was cold. Not the kind of cold that sneaks up on you gradually. The kind that arrives all at once when your body finally gets the message your mind has been too busy to send. She stopped on a pedestrian bridge over a tributary of the Han and stood there with her coat pulled tight, watching the black water move underneath her, and she thought about what it meant that she was not surprised. That was the thing she kept coming back to. She was devastated, yes. She was furious in a deep structural way that hadn't fully surfaced yet, because she was still in the part where you function before you fall apart. But she was not surprised. And the fact that she was not surprised meant something about how carefully she had not looked at the things she'd been looking at. She pulled out her phone. No messages. She put it back. She walked to the subway and took the train back to her neighborhood and bought a bottle of water from a convenience store because she needed to do something with her hands. The man behind the counter said something in Korean she didn't catch, and she said, "감사합니다," which was thank you, and in one of maybe 11 words she'd acquired, and he nodded and she walked out, and all of it was so normal, so completely and relentlessly normal, that she almost laughed. She did not sleep well. She slept in the fragmented way she slept when something was wrong. 2 hours, awake, an hour, awake, lying in the dark, running the same information through different arrangements, looking for the configuration that made it hurt less. There wasn't one. In the morning, she got up at 5:30 and went to the studio because the studio was the only place that made consistent sense. She had been there for 2 hours, cutting pattern pieces for the 4th garment in the collection, when her phone lit up with a message from a number she didn't recognize. Korean country code, no contact name. Check your email. All of it, everything from the last 3 weeks. She put the scissors down. She opened her email on her laptop and she started reading, and by the time she was 4 minutes in, her hands had gone still on the keyboard, and she was just staring at the screen with the particular blankness that happens when your brain encounters something it doesn't have a ready category for. The emails were from a Korean financial publication, an investigative journalist named Shin Ji-ho, whose name she didn't recognize. The first email had arrived 18 days ago, which meant it had come in when she'd been in the middle of the frantic logistics of the studio build, and she'd seen it and filed it mentally as press inquiry, follow up later, which she now understood had been a spectacular mistake. She read them in order. The first was a request for comment on allegations that her fashion house, Holloway Seoul, the name she'd registered 2 months ago and had been building toward for longer than that, was being used as a financial vehicle for the Bayo syndicate. The second, a week later, reiterated the request and noted that the publication intended to proceed with or without her comment. The third had arrived 6 days ago and contained, as attachments, 4 documents that made her stomach drop through the floor. Financial statements. Not hers, not any statement she'd ever seen or signed or authorized, but bearing the name Holloway Seoul at the top, and showing in very clean and legible columns transactions she had never made. Transfers, amounts, dates, all of it fabricated, she was almost certain, but fabricated with enough precision to look real to anyone who wasn't her. And photographs. 8 photographs taken from outside her studio windows. Her, at the cutting table, on the phone, reviewing something with her contractor, taken with a telephoto lens through the big north-facing windows she'd been so pleased about. Weeks of surveillance, compressed into 8 images, arranged to suggest, what? She wasn't sure yet, but the arrangement implied something deliberate, implied she'd been watched, implied she was part of something. She sat with her hands flat on the table and she breathed. In her experience, panic was a luxury you paid for later. What she needed right now was not panic. What she needed was to understand the shape of what she was inside before she started swinging. She called Destiny in Chicago. It was 4 in the afternoon there. Destiny picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me," Nia said. "What happened?" Immediately alert. This was why she'd called Destiny first. Not because Destiny would have solutions, but because Destiny would skip every unnecessary thing and go straight to the nerve. Nia told her. All of it. The dinner last night, the word syndicate, the emails, the fabricated documents, the photographs through her studio windows. She told it in order without editorializing because if she started editorializing, she would start feeling it, and she didn't have room for that yet. When she finished, there was a brief silence. "Okay," Destiny said. "Okay. First thing, do not respond to that journalist." "I know." "Second thing, do you have a lawyer there?" "The contract came with a firm. I've never needed them for anything." "You need them now. Call them before you do anything else." A pause. "What are you going to do about him?" Nia looked at the cutting table, at the pattern pieces she'd been working on before everything changed shape. "I don't know yet." "Are you safe?" The question landed differently than she expected. She'd been thinking about documents and reputation and everything she'd built. She hadn't been thinking about safe. "Yes," she said. And she believed it. Whatever Jun Seok was, she believed that. "Okay," Destiny said again. "Call the lawyer. Call me back after." And Nia, her voice shifted slightly. "I know what you're doing right now. You're holding it together because you have to. That's right. But you're going to need to let yourself fall apart at some point." "After the collection launches," Nia said. A short silence. Then, from Destiny, "You are something else." She called the law firm at 9 a.m. A senior attorney named Kim Seung-woo was available by 10, and she was in his office, a measured, serious space in a building near Gangnam Station, by 10:15, with screenshots of everything on her phone and the full email chain printed at a copy shop she'd passed on the way. He read everything carefully. He asked her 4 specific questions. Then he sat back in his chair and said, in English that was excellent and unhurried, "The financial documents are fabricated. I can confirm this relatively quickly by cross-referencing with your actual filings. The photographs are more concerning in the short term because they don't require fabrication. They simply imply." "Who would do this?" she said. Not quite a question. Half of her already knew the answer was someone connected to Jun Seok's world. The other half didn't want to be right about that. "That I can't tell you," Kim said. "But I can tell you this is not random. Someone has been watching your studio for at least 3 weeks. Someone prepared financial documents specific enough to require access to your company registration materials. This is targeted." He paused. "Ms. Holloway, do you have reason to believe someone within the Seojin group might wish to damage this project?" She thought about Han Mira's face, the flat certainty of it, the last woman who got close to him. "Maybe," she said. "I'll need you to be more specific." "Not yet," she said. "Let me confirm something first." She didn't go to Jun Seok first. She went to Han Mira. She found out where Mira's office was through the public Seojin group directory, and she arrived there at 2 in the afternoon without an appointment, which she knew would not go over well, which was part of the point. She told the assistant outside that she needed 5 minutes, and if Ms. Han wasn't available, she'd wait in the corridor where anyone passing through could see her, which was a petty threat, but an effective one because it implied the existence of a scene. She was shown in after 3 minutes. Han Mira was at her desk, and she looked at Nia with an expression that was somewhere between irritation and something that might have been— Nia watched for it carefully. A flash of something closer to alarm. fast and suppressed, but there. "Miss Holloway," she said. Even. "You don't have an appointment." "No," Nia agreed. She sat down without being invited. "I want to ask you something directly." Mira sat back slightly, watched her. "You told me to call you," Nia said, "when I found out who he really was. You said you'd be someone I could come to." She paused. "Did you know this was coming? The journalist, the documents, the photographs?" A silence. "No," Mira said. "That was very fast." "Because it's true." Something moved through Mira's expression. The irritation was gone, replaced by something Nia couldn't read cleanly. "Whoever did this, it wasn't me." "But you know who it might be." Mira looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to her office door, and closed it. She came back to her desk but didn't sit. She stood behind it with her arms at her sides, which was the most unguarded Nia had ever seen her. "There are people," Mira said carefully, "who would like to see Jun Seok weakened. Not the Seojin group, him, specifically. There is a man named Yo Tae-jin. He runs competing interests. He has been looking for leverage against Jun Seok for over a year." A pause. Hurting something Jun Seok has invested in personally, not financially, personally, would be exactly his method. Nia stared at her. "You're telling me this?" "Yes." "Why are you telling me this?" Mira sat down. She pressed her lips together, and for a moment she just looked tired. Not the fashionable, controlled exhaustion of an executive, but actual tiredness. "Because I've spent 11 years watching that man carry something that should have killed him by now," she said. "And I have never once seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." She said it not warmly, but honestly, which was worse somehow. "If this destroys your company, he'll blame himself. And it will cost him something he can't get back." Nia absorbed that, all of it, including the part that wasn't about her at all. "You're still in love with him," she said. Mira's expression went very still. "That is not relevant." "No," Nia said, "but it explains why you've been honest with me just now when you've been trying to push me away for months." She held the woman's eyes. "You love him, and you've decided I'm better for him than you are, and so you're helping me." A long silence. "You're more perceptive than I expected," Mira said, very quietly. "People keep making that mistake," Nia said. She went to Jun Seok that evening. She called first and said she needed to see him, and he said he'd come to her, and she said no, she'd come to him, which was a deliberate choice because she wanted to see where he lived, wanted to be on his ground for this conversation rather than neutral territory, because neutral territory was starting to feel like a fiction they'd been maintaining, and she was done with fictions. His apartment was in a residential building in Yongsan that had the discreet, deliberately understated quality of money that didn't need to announce itself. His assistant let her in. Jun Seok was in the main room, jacket off, which was the most undone she'd seen him. He had the particular tight stillness of someone who had been waiting and hadn't decided yet what they were waiting for. "Sit down," she said, which was funny given that it was his apartment, but he sat. She sat across from him, and she put her phone on the table between them, screen up, with the email from the journalist open. He read it. She watched his face. It moved through things. She saw it, the control he maintained even now. But there was something underneath the control that was cold and specific and not at all calm. "When did you receive this?" he said. 18 days ago. I missed it. It came in at a bad time." She kept her voice level. "There are 3 more. And financial documents that someone fabricated using my company registration information. And 8 weeks of photographs through my studio windows." He was very still. "Yo Tae-jin," she said. He looked up from the phone. Something in his face shifted. Not surprise at the name, but at her knowing it. "Han Mira told me," Nia said. He put the phone down. He put his hands flat on the table in a gesture that she recognized now as his version of grounding himself. "How much did she tell you?" "Enough." She looked at him. "Jun Seok, I need you to understand something." She made sure she had his eyes. "I am not here to be protected. I'm not here to be managed or insulated or kept in a clean version of this situation. That's done. What I need from you right now is every piece of information that is relevant to what is happening to my company, my name, and my collection. All of it. Not the version you've decided I can handle." He looked at her for a long moment. Yo Tae-jin is a rival, he said. Specifically mine. He has been building towards something for 14 months, and this, he looked at the phone. This is the beginning of it. He's not after your company. Your company is the angle. He's trying to destabilize me publicly by creating a scandal that attaches my name to a foreign designer running money. Will it work? She said. The fabricated documents won't hold up. That's not what I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. In the short term, it will create noise. The kind of noise that can damage a debut. Journalists and buyers and industry contacts will hear the allegations before the refutation, which is how these things always work. He met her eyes. Your launch is 6 weeks away. I know when my launch is. If this publication runs the story before then I launch into the middle of a scandal, she said. I know. She breathed slowly. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to dismantle it, he said, with a quietness that didn't sound like a boast. Sounded like someone describing something they'd done before. I have what I need to counter every piece of fabricated evidence. I have contacts within the publication who can… Legally, she said sharply. He paused. Yes. I need it to be legal, she said. I need everything connected to my company and my name to be legal. If you use anything, any part of the other thing, to fix this, it contaminates everything I've built. Do you understand that? Yes. He said it without defensiveness. I understand that. Say it back to me. Something moved across his face. Not offense. Something softer than that. Everything I do to address this will be clean, he said. Financial pressure, legal counter-evidence, media contacts working within legitimate channels. Nothing else. He held her eyes. Nothing that can touch you. She sat with that for a moment. Then the email notification appeared on her phone screen between them, and they both looked at it at the same time. It was from the journalist, Shin Ji-ho, time-stamped 11 minutes ago. Final notice before publication. We will be running the story Friday. You have until midnight Thursday to respond. It was Tuesday. The silence in the room was a specific kind of silence, the kind that has a shape. That's 48 hours, Nia said. Yes. She looked at him. At this man who had shown her a river and listened to her and built her something clean, inside something that wasn't, and who was looking back at her now with the expression of someone who has put down everything they were carrying and is waiting to see what you do with it. I have 6 garments left to finish, she said. I have a team coming in Thursday for the first full fitting. I have a launch that I have given everything I have to. She stood up. Fix it, she said. However you need to fix it within the lines I just gave you, fix it, because I am not stopping. Not for Yo Tae-jin, not for a journalist with fabricated documents, not for anyone who thought that threatening what I've built was going to be enough to make me fold. She picked up her phone. And Jun Seok. She looked at him one more time. When this is over, when the launch is done and this mess is cleaned up and I can think straight again, we're going to have a different conversation. About what comes next. About what you're building and what I'm building and whether those things can exist in the same space without destroying each other. She held his eyes. But that's later. Right now I need you to do what you said you can do. She walked to the door. Nia. His voice stopped her. She turned. He was still sitting, but he was looking at her with something open in his face that she'd never quite seen before, unguarded in a way that looked like it cost him something. I'm sorry, he said, for the part I made harder by not telling you sooner. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. I'll be in the studio. She left. Outside the building, the night air hit her like a wall and she stood on the sidewalk for 3 seconds, just 3, with her eyes closed and her fists tight inside her coat pockets. 3 seconds for the fear, for the enormity of it, the fabricated documents with her company name on them, the photographs taken through her windows without her knowledge, the story about to run in 48 hours, the 6 weeks of work still ahead of her, and at the center of all of it, a man who was something she'd never expected and wanted things she hadn't planned to want. 3 seconds. Then she opened her eyes, flagged a cab, and went back to the studio. The 4th garment was waiting on the cutting table where she'd left it, pattern pieces spread in the careful arrangement she'd be able to reconstruct from memory if she had to. She hung up her coat. She washed her hands at the utility sink. She sat down and picked up the scissors, and she started cutting with the steady, deliberate accuracy of someone who had decided that the only way through the middle of something was. She cut until 2 in the morning. Not because the work required it. She could have stopped at midnight with a clean conscience and a reasonable amount accomplished. She cut because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant the full weight of the last 48 hours would arrive all at once with nowhere to put it. So she kept the scissors moving and the music low, and she worked the way she worked when everything else was falling apart, which was with the particular ferocity of someone who has learned that the only thing they can fully trust is what they make with their own hands. At 2:15, she made a mistake. Cut 3 millimeters into the seam allowance of the silk panel she'd been saving for the 6th piece, a pale, almost colorless ivory that had cost her more per meter than she wanted to remember. She caught it immediately, set the scissors down, pressed both palms flat on the table, and stood there breathing. 3 millimeters, fixable. She could work around it. She looked at the cut. She breathed again. Then she pinned the panel aside, turned off the main lights, and lay down on the studio couch she'd brought in for exactly these kinds of nights, and she stared at the ceiling until her eyes closed on their own terms. Wednesday arrived gray and cold and without ceremony. She was back at the cutting table by 7. Yoon, Jun Seok's assistant, arrived at her studio at 8:30 with coffee and a message delivered verbally, not by phone. He's working on it. Legal team engaged. Do not contact the journalist. Tell him I wasn't planning to, Nia said. Yoon nodded and left. He was back within the hour with a second message. Yeo Tae-jin has contacted 2 other publications. They received the same package. We have until Thursday midnight, not just this one outlet. She set her coffee down very carefully. How many publications? She said. 3 total, Yoon said. He was reading from his phone, relaying exactly, which she appreciated. 1 financial, 1 fashion trade, 1 general news. Fashion trade. The fashion trade publication was the one that mattered most. The financial story could be countered with audits and legal documentation. The general news story would burn fast and bright and disappear. But a story in the fashion trade press, one that put her name alongside words like syndicate and money laundering before her debut collection had a single buyer, that was the kind of damage that followed a career. That was the kind of story editors remembered 3 years later when they were deciding whose show to attend and whose invitation went to the bottom of the pile. Tell him I need an update by noon, she said. He said to expect a call at 11. She nodded. Yoon left. She picked up her scissors and went back to work because there was nothing else she could do with her hands, and her hands needed something. The call came at 11:03. Jun Seok's voice was controlled, but there was something under it, a compressed, deliberate quality she was learning to read as the sound he made when things were not going to plan, and he was deciding not to show it. The fashion trade publication is the problem, he said, which meant he understood exactly what she understood. The editor is someone Yeo Tae-jin has a relationship with, long-standing. The financial counter-documentation will work on the other 2. This one is more complicated. How complicated? The editor has been shown a specific document, one that appears to show your signature on a fund transfer approval. She stopped breathing for a second. Just one. That's impossible. My signature is on file with the law firm and the registration documents. A forgery would be, it's a good forgery. The word sat in the air. How good? She said. Good enough that a non-expert would not immediately question it. A pause. Kim Sung-woo is filing for an emergency forensic document examination. We can prove it's a forgery. The process takes time we may not have. She walked to the studio window. The street below was ordinary. A delivery truck, 2 women with a stroller, a man on his phone. All of it moving through its day with the complete indifference of the world to individual catastrophe. What's the option? She said. I'm working on one. Jun Seok. She kept her voice flat. What is the option? A beat. There is a pressure point, he said carefully. Yeo Tae-jin has a business relationship with a manufacturing group in Busan. A relationship that is not publicly known. I have documentation. If that information reaches the right people before Thursday midnight, his motivation for the smear campaign becomes visible and the story inverts. He becomes the story instead of you. Is that documentation legally obtained? She said. Silence. Is it? She said again. The documentation itself is legitimate, he said. How it came to be in my possession is... Stop. She pressed two fingers to her temple. Stop right there. She breathed. I told you. I told you exactly what I told you. I know what you told me. Then why are you telling me this? Because I promised you honesty, he said, quietly. I'm telling you what exists. I'm not telling you I intend to use it. I'm telling you it's there because you told me you wanted to know everything relevant. A pause. There is a clean version. It requires time, more time than we have before Thursday. She turned from the window. She looked at her collection, the pieces on the rack, the work in progress on the table, the wall of fabric swatches and sketches, and the timeline she'd updated every single day since she arrived in Seoul. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of work she was not willing to see buried under a story she hadn't written and a signature she hadn't given. Find the clean version, she said. Whatever time it costs, find it. Even if the story runs Thursday. If the story runs, she said, I'll deal with it. I have dealt with worse with less. Find the clean version, get me the forensic report as fast as Kim Seung-woo can produce it, and let me worry about my launch. A longer silence. Nia, he said, and the way he said it, not business, not strategy, just her name in that specific register. I will fix this. I need you to know that. I know you'll try, she said. That's not the same thing and we both know it. Do what you can do cleanly, I'll do what I can do. She paused. I have 5 garments left. I have work. She hung up. She stood in the silence of the studio for 30 seconds. Then she went back to the cutting table. Wednesday afternoon, she got a visitor. She hadn't expected and hadn't wanted. He arrived at 3, knocked once, and opened the door before she answered, which told her immediately what she needed to know about him. He was in his 50s, expensive suit, the kind of build that suggested he'd been physically formidable once, and retained enough of it to be aware of the impression it made. He came in like someone who was accustomed to spaces reshaping themselves around his arrival. He was alone. No assistant, no companion, no obvious security, though she would think about that last part later. Ms. Holloway, he said in English that was accented and precise. My name is Yo Tai-jin. I apologize for arriving without notice. She did not put down her scissors. She stood at the cutting table and looked at him and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a very specific animal alertness, the kind that is not quite fear and not quite rage, and lives somewhere between them. I know who you are, she said. He looked around the studio, genuinely looking, she thought, not performing. He looked at the rack of finished pieces. He looked at the work on the table. Something moved through his expression that was almost appreciation. Your work is remarkable, he said. Why are you here? He looked at her. He was calm the way powerful men are calm when they're holding all the cards and know it. I want to offer you a resolution, he said. One that protects your company and your collection and costs you very little. What does it cost me? You return to Chicago, he said. End your relationship with the Seojin group. The story disappears. Every document, every photograph, every conversation with every journalist ends tonight. He spread his hand slightly. You launched here or somewhere else? That's your business. But you leave Seoul, and you leave Jun Seok-kong's orbit, and everything you've built here stays intact. She stared at him. That's it, she said. That's your offer. Yes. You fabricated financial documents with my name on them, she said. You had someone photograph me through my windows for weeks. You contacted 3 publications with a story designed to destroy my debut. And your resolution is that I just leave. Cleanly, he said, with your reputation and your collection and your future entirely intact. Her grip on the scissors tightened. She registered the tension in her hand and she made herself loosen it deliberately. Get out of my studio, she said. Something changed in his expression. Not anger, something colder. Ms. Holloway, you are standing in the middle of a situation you did not create and do not fully understand. The wisest thing, I understand it fine, she said. You're not actually afraid of me. You're afraid of him. And you came here because you thought threatening me was easier than facing him directly. She met his eyes. You were wrong. Get out. He looked at her for a moment. The coldness in his expression shifted into something she couldn't read. Not admiration, but a recalibration. Like he'd come in expecting one kind of person and found another. The story publishes Thursday, he said quietly. You have until midnight to reconsider. Out, she said. He left. The door closed behind him and she stood at the cutting table and she was shaking. Not visibly, she controlled that immediately, but internally, in the deep core of her, a trembling that was partly fear and partly adrenaline, and partly a fury so clean and total that it almost felt like calm. She called Jun Seok. He picked up in one ring. Yeo Tae-jin just left my studio, she said. The silence on his end was exactly 1 second long. Are you all right? Yes. He made an offer. I said no. She sat down the edge of the cutting table. He came alone, which I think means he wanted me to feel like this was private, like it was a conversation, not a threat. It was a threat. I know that, she breathed. He's not going to stop. No. Then what are we doing that's actually working? She heard him move, footsteps, a door. He was somewhere private now. Kim Sung-woo has the forensic team working overnight. By tomorrow morning, we will have the signature analysis. That kills the most damaging document. A pause. I've also reached the journalist at the financial publication independently. His editor has already agreed to hold pending the legal documentation. That's 1. 2 left. The general news outlet pulled back an hour ago. Someone higher in their organization made a call. He said this carefully, which meant he had been the call, or had arranged the call, through channels she'd told him had to be clean. Was it clean? She said. Yes, he said. A board member I know personally. No leverage, a genuine conversation about the liability of running a story based on fabricated documents. So 1 left, she said. The fashion trade. Yes. And the editor with the Yeo Tae-jin relationship. Yes. What do we have? A pause. I have a contact, he said slowly. A stylist who has worked with this publication for 12 years. She has a relationship with their deputy editor that bypasses the main editor entirely. If I can get the forensic report to the deputy editor before Thursday midnight, can she do that? She's willing to try, Nia exhaled. Get her the report the minute it's done, whatever time it is. I will. Jun Seok. She stopped, started again. Yeo Tae-jin came to my studio. He was in my space. He looked at my work. She said it not like a complaint, but like a fact she needed someone else to hold for a second because she couldn't hold it alone. That's something I need to tell you. I know. His voice was very quiet. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just end it. Thursday arrived like a verdict. She was at the studio at 6. Her team, the 2 seamstresses she'd hired, a pattern assistant named Jisoo, who was 24 and terrifyingly precise, and a finishing specialist who worked freelance and had been recommended by 3 different people, arrived at 8. The fitting was scheduled for 10. 5 garments needed to be on bodies before noon so she could see what was working and what needed to be taken apart. She told them nothing about what was happening off the floor. They didn't need it. What they needed was her present, clear-eyed, making decisions. She gave them that. The fittings were brutal in the way fittings always were. The gap between what something looked like on a dress form and what it did on an actual body in actual motion was never entirely predictable. And the third piece, the one with the beaded jacket she'd been proudest of, had a shoulder issue that made her stand in front of it for 4 full minutes without speaking while her team stood very still and waited. Take it apart at the shoulder seam, she said finally. Both sides. I'm going to rework the support structure underneath. Jisoo made a small sound that was not quite a word. I know, Nia said. We have time. She was not certain they had time. She worked through lunch. Yoon appeared at 1 with food she hadn't ordered and left it without comment. She ate standing up, one hand holding a sandwich, the other adjusting a hem. At 2:15, Jun Seok called with an update. The forensic report was expected by 6 p.m. The stylist contact had spoken to the deputy editor. The deputy editor had asked for the report before making any decision. 6 hours, Nia said. Yes. Okay. She watched Jisoo reworking the beaded jacket across the room, fingers moving with the concentrated precision of someone who had decided to be excellent. Okay. At 4 o'clock, Mira walked through the studio door. Nia looked up from the fitting she was conducting. Mira was dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different in her carriage today. Less armor, or different armor. She stood just inside the door and looked at the room, at the garments on the rack, and the organized chaos of a working studio on deadline. And something passed through her expression that wasn't quite emotion, but was adjacent to it. "I heard about yesterday," Mira said. "Yeo Tae-jin coming here. Word travels. In this world, yes." Mira walked toward her, stopped at a respectful distance. "I have information he didn't expect me to have." She held out a USB drive. "Correspondence between Yeo Tae-jin and the editor at the fashion trade publication. Dated, specific. It shows explicitly that the story was commissioned, paid for, before any documents were even fabricated." Nia stared at the drive. "That's not legally obtained," she said. "No," Mira said evenly. "It isn't, but it doesn't have to be presented as evidence. It can be described to the deputy editor, specifically enough to make them understand that their publication is about to become part of a story rather than reporting one." Nia looked at her. "You're asking me to use information from you that came from the same world I told Jun Seok I wouldn't touch." "I'm asking you to let me handle it," Mira said. "The contact is mine. The conversation would be mine. Your name and Jun Seok's name would not be on it." "Why?" Nia said. "Why are you doing this?" Mira looked at her for a moment. She wasn't warm. She was constitutionally incapable of warm, Nia thought. But she was honest in the way people are honest when they've decided something private and it's cost them. "Because it's the right thing," she said simply. "And because I am tired of Yeo Tae-jin operating like consequences are for other people." Nia looked at the drive. She thought about clean and what it meant and where the line was. She thought about Jun Seok's voice on the phone saying, "I promised you honesty." She thought about a forensic report that wasn't ready yet, and a deadline that was 7 hours away, and 6 garments that needed to be finished, and a launch that was not going to not happen. She thought about her grandmother's hands, about the embroidery technique that had put her in this city in the first place, about things that were earned versus things that were given and what it cost to know the difference. She looked at Mira. "The deputy editor's name," she said. Mira told her. Nia handed the drive back. "Go," she said. "Handle it. Your name, your contact, your conversation. I don't want to know the details." She met Mira's eyes. "Thank you." Mira nodded. She turned to go. "Mira." Nia stopped her. Mira turned. "For what it's worth," Nia said, and she meant it without cruelty. "He's lucky to have someone like you in his corner, even if that's not the corner you wanted." Something in Mira's face moved, barely, quickly, controlled in under a second. She nodded once, short and final. Then she left. The studio was quiet for a moment. Jisoo was looking at Nia from across the room. "Back to work," Nia said. The forensic report arrived at 6:47 p.m. Jun Seok called at 6:49. His voice had dropped the compressed quality it had carried for 2 days. Not relief. He wasn't someone who sounded relieved, but something had loosened. "The report confirms the forgery," he said. "Kim Seung-woo sent it to the deputy editor 7 minutes ago." A pause. "We also received separate information reached the deputy editor through another channel about the commissioned nature of the piece." "Good," Nia said. A beat. "You know what that channel was?" "I don't know anything about it," she said. "I was at my studio all day." Another beat. Then, quietly, "The publication just called Kim Seung-woo. They're killing the story." The studio was silent. She was standing at the cutting table and the 9th garment was spread in front of her. The one she'd been working on when Yeo Tae-jin had walked through her door 27 hours ago. And it was 2/3 done, and it was going to be extraordinary when it was finished. She knew that the way she knew very few things, in the body, not the head. The way you know things you've been working toward for longer than you can remember. "All 3, she said. "All 3 publications," Jun Seok confirmed. "The story is dead." She exhaled, long and slow and all the way down. "Okay," she said. "Nia, I have 5 days until the launch," she said. "I have work." She paused. "Tell me the rest is handled. Yeo Tae-jin." "He won't move again," Jun Seok said, quietly. "Certain. I've made that clear." She didn't ask how. She'd decided she wasn't going to ask how. That was the line, and she was going to live on her side of it. "Okay," she said again. "Then I'll see you at the launch." "I'll be there," he said. She hung up. She stood at the table. She pressed both palms flat against the fabric in front of her, and she felt her own heartbeat, steady and insistent. And she thought about everything she'd been through to get here. Not just the last 72 hours, but the years before them. The creative director who hadn't believed in her, the editors who'd whispered, the collection she'd built in Chicago from nothing on the faith that someone somewhere would eventually say yes. She thought about Han Mira, walking out of the studio with a USB drive and a decision already made. She thought about Jun Seok's voice saying partial, and what it meant to know someone in the parts they let you see and love them anyway for the parts they were still becoming. She picked up her needle. She worked until midnight. She was there when her phone lit up with a message from a number she'd blocked 3 weeks ago. A burner, she'd later realize, arranged specifically so she couldn't ignore it. The message was 4 words and an image. And the image was a photograph she had never seen of a woman she didn't recognize. And the 4 words above it read, "Ask him about her." She stared at the screen. The needle was still in her hand, thread trailing from the eye, the garment spread across. She stared at the message for a long time. The needle was still in her hand. The thread had gone slack against her fingers. The garment spread across the table didn't move, didn't demand anything, just waited. The way unfinished work always waits. Patient and indifferent to whatever was happening to the person supposed to be finishing it. Ask him about her. The photograph was taken outdoors. A woman, maybe late 20s, Korean, standing beside Jun Seok in what looked like a garden somewhere. Not a public event. No other people, no cameras, no context that suggested performance. Just 2 people standing close in a private space, and something in the way they were positioned that was not nothing. The woman's face was turned slightly toward him. His hand was at the small of her back. It could have been anything. It could have been a cousin, a colleague, a moment pulled entirely out of context and weaponized. Nia had spent enough time in the fashion industry to know how photographs lied. She knew what suggestion could do dressed up as evidence. But she also knew what she felt when she looked at it, which was a cold and very specific thing that lived in the chest and didn't have a clean name. She set the needle down. She set the phone face down on the table. She stood there in the studio at midnight with the city making its low, constant noise outside, and she decided very deliberately what she was going to do, which was finish the seam she'd been working on before the message arrived, hang the garment carefully, turn off the lights, and go back to the hotel and sleep. In the morning, she would ask him. Not tonight. Tonight she was too tired and too wrung out and too close to the last 72 hours to trust herself to hear the answer clearly. She'd learned that about herself somewhere in her late 20s, that there were conversations you had to wait for the right state of mind, not because you were afraid of them, but because you wanted to be present for them. You wanted to be the version of yourself who could hold what was said without dropping it. She finished the seam. She hung the garment. She turned off the lights. She called him at 8 the next morning, and she said, "I need to see you. Not the studio, not the restaurant, somewhere private." He said, "Come here." She went. He met her at the door of his apartment himself. Not Yoon, not anyone else. He was dressed, but just barely, like he'd been up for a while but hadn't been expecting to need to be presentable yet. He stepped back to let her in, and she came in and she took her coat off, and she put her phone on the table in front of him, screen up, with the photograph visible. She watched his face. He looked at it for a long time, longer than the photograph itself required, which told her something. Then he sat down on the couch, slowly, with the particular movement of someone making room for a difficult thing. She sat across from him. "Tell me," she said. He pressed his hands together, elbows on his knees. He looked at the photograph, then at her. "Her name is Park Soo-yeon," he said. We were together. For 3 years. It ended 2 years before you came to Seoul." "How did it end?" He was quiet for a moment. "She found out what I was," he said. "Not the Seojin group. The other thing. She found out and she—" He stopped. He started again more carefully. "She didn't leave immediately. She tried to stay. But the things she had to navigate, the fear she had to carry, it changed her. By the time she left, she was someone who didn't trust anything anymore, including herself." He paused. "I take responsibility for that." Nia listened. She kept her face even, not because she was suppressing something, but because she was genuinely trying to hear him. "Is she safe?" Nia said. He looked at her. "Yes. She's in Busan. She has a life. Yes, she's safe." "Did you love her?" "Yes," he said, simply. "Do you still?" A beat. Not in the way that means what you think it means. He looked at her steadily. The way you love someone who taught you something true about yourself. That doesn't disappear. But it doesn't compete with anything. She sat with that. She turned it over and looked at it from different angles. Yo Tae-jin sent this, she said. It wasn't a question. Probably. He looked at the phone. It's the kind of move he makes when the direct approach fails. He went for your studio. That didn't work. He went for the publications. That didn't work. Now he's going for the thing he thinks will make you doubt without giving you anything provable. Is there anything in this photograph I should doubt? She said. No, he said. I've told you everything about her that's true. She looked at him. This man who was complicated in ways she'd had to learn one layer at a time, who had been partial by design and honest when he finally couldn't be anything else, who sat in front of her now with nothing performed about him, not composure, not calm, not the executive director quality that filled rooms. Just a person who had made difficult choices and was waiting to see if she could live with what those choices had cost. I believe you, she said. Something in his face shifted. Not relief. Not quite. Something more interior. That doesn't mean I'm not angry, she said. About the photograph, about being sent it by someone trying to manipulate me, about the fact that your history is still a weapon someone can use to hurt me. She kept her voice even. But I believe what you just told me. Okay, he said quietly. The launch is in 4 days, she said. I know. I need to go back to the studio. She stood. She picked up her phone. I need you to understand that after the launch, and I mean after, not before, because I cannot hold this and hold the collection at the same time. We're going to sit down and I'm going to ask you every question I still have. About Suyan, about the syndicate, about what your plan actually looks like and what timeline it's on. And I need real answers. You'll have them, he said. She nodded. She picked up her coat. Nia. He stood. He didn't move toward her, just stood. The woman in that photograph, she wasn't strong enough for what I was asking her to be. I don't mean that as a criticism of her. I mean that I was asking something unreasonable. He looked at her. You are not her. You are... He stopped, and when he started again, his voice was lower. You are the most structurally sound person I have ever met. And I mean that as the highest thing I know how to say. She looked at him for a long moment. 4 days, she said. Then she left. The 4 days were the most concentrated work of her life. Not the hardest. The hardest had been the 18 months in Chicago building the collection in the first place, on nothing, with no certainty that anyone would ever see it. But the most concentrated. Every hour had a task, and every task had a sequence, and she moved through all of it with a clarity that surprised even her, like the storm of the previous week had scraped away every non-essential thought and left only the work and what the work needed. Jisoo was there every day. The finishing specialist worked 2 18-hour days back-to-back without complaint. The 2 seamstresses handled the beaded jacket repair with a patience that made Nia want to pay them twice what she'd contracted, which she resolved to figure out how to do after the launch, when she could think about money again. The 10th garment, the one she'd been working on when Yo Tae-jin's final message arrived, was finished on the 3rd day. She held it up under the studio lights, and it was right. Not perfect, because she had stopped believing in perfect around the same time she'd stopped trying to make herself smaller, but right in the way things are right when they are exactly what they intended to be. The ivory silk with the worked seam allowance, the 3mm cut she'd fixed, the panel that had almost gone wrong and hadn't, all of it present in the finished piece, all of it invisible to anyone who hadn't been inside the making of it. She thought that was probably true of most things. On the morning of the launch, she arrived at the venue at 6 a.m. It was a converted industrial space in Seongsu-dong, 8 minutes from the studio, which was not a coincidence. She'd chosen it because it looked like work. Raw ceilings, exposed ducts, the kind of space that didn't apologize for what it was. She didn't want the collection presented in a room that was trying to be something else. She wanted both things to be honest. The team that came in for setup was professional and fast. By 10, the lighting was set. By noon, the seating was arranged. 70 people, editors and buyers, and a handful of people from the Korean fashion press she'd been building relationships with slowly over the past months. Not a massive debut. Not a spectacle. A precise, deliberate introduction. Destiny called it too. Tell me everything is perfect, Destiny said. Nothing is perfect, Nia said. Everything is right. A pause. That's better anyway. Another pause. I'm proud of you. Nia was standing backstage with a steamer in her hand, and she felt the words land differently than they usually did. Not like a compliment, like a fact being confirmed. Come visit, Nia said. After. Come see what I built. Book me a flight and I'm there. She hung up. She went back to work. Hanmira arrived at 5:30, 45 minutes before the show. She came in through the service entrance, which Nia had left word about at the door, and she found Nia backstage doing a final check on the garments in sequence. She was alone, no entourage, dressed simply by her standards, and she stood at the edge of the backstage area and looked at the rack of 14 pieces in their running order with an expression Nia couldn't fully read. You came, Nia said. You sent the ticket, Mira said. I did. Nia smoothed the collar of the 8th piece, a structured coat in deep green that she'd finished at 1 in the morning 2 days ago. I wanted you to see it. Mira walked slowly along the rack. She looked at each piece without touching. Her eyes were specific, professional, trained, and Nia watched her the way she watched anyone who really looked at her work, with a combination of exposure and defiance that she'd never entirely resolved. Mira stopped at the beaded jacket. She studied the shoulder structure. This was repaired, she said. Yes. I can't see where. No, Nia said. You can't. Mira looked at her. Something in her face was very still, and then something released in it, small, controlled, but genuine. It's extraordinary, she said, flat and honest, the way she said everything. All of it. Thank you, Nia said, for what you did. The deputy editor. I haven't said that properly. Mira straightened slightly. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. I'm saying it. Nia turned to face her fully. You put yourself in a complicated position to protect something that had nothing to do with you. That matters. Mira was quiet for a moment. She looked back at the rack. It had something to do with me, she said very quietly, and left it there. Nia let it stand. Some things didn't need completing. There's a seat in the 3rd row, Nia said. Good angle. You'll see everything. Mira nodded. She smoothed her jacket, a gesture so habitual it was barely a gesture, and walked toward the front of the house. Jun Seok arrived at 6 exactly. She saw him through the gap in the stage curtain. 3rd seat, 2nd row, alone. He was wearing a dark suit with no tie, which for him was the equivalent of dress down. He sat with the stillness she knew now as attention, not detachment, and he looked at the empty stage with an expression she recognized as the one he wore when he was anticipating something he'd decided to let himself feel. She closed the curtain. She stood backstage with her collection and her team, and the particular pre-show silence that was not actually silence but the compression of everything about to release. And she breathed once, all the way down, the way her grandmother had taught her before anything that mattered. Feel yourself first, then give. At 6:15, the lights went down. The show lasted 22 minutes. She stood in the wings for all of it, watching each piece move through the space. The models had been briefed to walk slowly. This was not a show built for spectacle, for rapid-fire impact. It was built to be seen. Each garment deserved the time it took to be seen. The 3rd piece, the beaded jacket, the one that had nearly broken her, came out 8th in the running order, which she'd done deliberately. 8th was when the room had settled, when the initial noise in people's minds had quieted enough to actually look. She watched the jacket move under the lighting she'd approved, the beadwork catching and releasing, the shoulder repair invisible, the West African embroidery technique her grandmother had taught her present in the construction of something that had never existed before. The room was very quiet. She didn't take that as a good sign or a bad sign. She took it as attention, which was the only thing she'd ever asked for. The final piece, the ivory silk, the one with the 3mm cut she'd fixed, the one that had been on the table when everything was falling apart, closed the show. When it reached the center of the space, she heard something she hadn't planned for and didn't entirely know what to do with, which was the sound of a room that had stopped doing anything except looking. When the lights came back up, she walked out. She didn't rehearse this part. She never did. She walked out the way she walked into every room that had ever tried to tell her she didn't belong in it, with her spine straight and her chin level and the awareness of every single thing she'd traded to be standing there. The room stood. Not immediately, not all at once. It happened in sections. the way genuine reactions happen rather than performed ones. First, the buyers in the back who had nothing to gain from politics. Then the press in the middle rows. Then, last, the section near the front where the industry heavyweights sat, who were always the last to move because they had the most invested in appearing unmoved. She stood there and she let herself feel it. She didn't minimize it, or deflect it, or translate it immediately into whatever it meant for the business. She just stood there in the light and let 14 months of work and 2 years of planning and 31 years of being told in various ways in various languages that she was too much or not enough. She let all of that have the moment it had earned. The reception after the show was a managed chaos. She moved through with the professional grace of someone who had learned to work a room without losing herself in it. She spoke to editors, answered specific questions about construction and sourcing, accepted the praise of people whose praise she'd respect tomorrow when she had more distance, and deflected the pointed questions from a fashion journalist who wanted a statement about the recent controversy by saying simply and pleasantly that she wasn't aware of any controversy relevant to her work, and would he like to discuss the beadwork technique instead, which worked because he actually would. She found Jun Seok near the back of the room, beside a window, holding a drink he hadn't been making much use of. He watched her come toward him, and he didn't try to look anything other than what he was, which was a man who had spent 22 minutes watching something he understood was important and was still somewhere inside the weight of it. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. She stood beside him and looked at the room, the people, the energy, the collection visible on a few bodies where models were still wearing select pieces. "Tell me honestly," she said, "not as an investor, as someone who actually knows things." "It's the most original debut collection I've seen in a decade," he said. "And I'm saying that having attended shows in Paris and Milan and New York where I have no personal investment." He paused. "The jacket is going to be talked about for years." She nodded. She let herself have that too. "I have questions," she said, quieter. "Still, about you, about what comes next, about the woman in the photograph, and what it cost her and what it cost you, about the syndicate and your timeline and all the things I said I'd ask after the launch." She turned to look at him. "It's after the launch." His expression didn't change, but something in it settled, like he'd been waiting for this specific moment and was relieved it had arrived. "I know," he said. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight I need to actually be here, but—" She paused, finding the words. "I wanted you to know that the questions don't mean I've already decided. I don't make decisions before I have all the information. That's how I got into trouble in New York, taking rooms at their own valuation without looking at what was behind the wall." "What are you saying?" he said carefully. "I'm saying I'm still here," she said. "I'm still asking, which means I haven't decided to stop." She held his eyes. "But I need you to be honest with me from now to the end of whatever this is. Not partial, not managed, actually honest, even when it costs you something." "Yes," he said, without pause. "And I need you to understand that my work," she said, "my company, my name, my creative decisions, those are mine, completely mine. Whatever happens between us personally doesn't cross that line in either direction." "I have never thought otherwise," he said. "Good," she exhaled. "Okay." They stood beside each other looking at the room. A buyer Nia had met twice was examining the catalog with the focused expression of someone doing math. The journalist who'd wanted a statement about the controversy was now genuinely asking a model about the beadwork. Mira was near the entrance, speaking with someone Nia didn't recognize, her posture as straight and contained as always. But something in her face when she glanced across the room at the collection, not at Jun Seok, at the work, that was close to something peaceful. "She did something brave," Jun Seok said quietly, following Nia's gaze. "Yes," Nia said. "I told her." He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it, which was right. The following weeks arrived with the velocity of consequence. The fashion trade publication that had killed the story ran a feature instead, a long one, 4 pages, with photographs Nia had approved, focused entirely on the construction methods and the West African embroidery technique, and the story of how a designer from Chicago's South Side had built something in Seoul that the industry had not seen coming. The journalist was not Shin Ji-ho. It was the deputy editor. The financial publication ran a separate piece on the Holloway Seoul funding structure as a model for transparent international creative partnerships, which was so precisely the opposite of what Yo Tae-jin had intended that Nia read it twice just to confirm she was reading it correctly. 3 buyers placed orders within 2 weeks of the show. One was from Paris, which made her sister in Chicago scream into the phone at a volume that was briefly concerning. The other 2 were from Seoul and Tokyo, which meant the collection was going to be seen on 3 continents before the year was out. Yo Tae-jin went quiet. She didn't ask exactly how or why. She had decided on that line, and she was living on her side of it. What she knew was that he withdrew, that the fabricated documents were formally discredited through Kim Seung-woo's legal proceedings, and that his name disappeared from the conversation the way threats sometimes did, when the people making them discovered they'd underestimated what they were threatening. She heard, secondhand through Yoon, that he had more significant problems of his own to manage. She did not investigate this further. She and Jun Seok had the conversation she'd promised herself they'd have. It took 3 nights. Not because there was so much to say, but because some things needed pauses, needed the space after a thing was said to exist before the next thing was added. She asked about Park Soo-yeon, and he told her everything, the full account, without softening the parts that made him look like someone who had loved imperfectly and caused damage because of it. She listened to all of it, and she understood it in the way you understand things that are true even when they're uncomfortable, clearly and without the need to rearrange them into something easier. She asked about the syndicate, the actual structure of it, the plan he'd described in the abbreviated version the night she'd walked out into the Seoul night air and walked for 40 minutes. He told her that too. The timeline was not short. The transformation of criminal operations into legitimate businesses was a process of years, not months, and it was not clean at the edges even when the intentions were clean at the center. "Are you doing this because you want to?" she asked, "or because you think you should?" He considered the question seriously, which was one of the things about him she had decided mattered. "Both," he said. "In the beginning it was mostly should. Now it's, I want to be able to look at what I've built and not have to quarantine it. I want it to be something I can stand inside of entirely." He looked at her. That desire got stronger. Recently. She understood what recently meant. She didn't say so. She filed it in the same place she filed the way he said her name sometimes, like he was keeping it somewhere careful. The 3rd night she asked the question she'd been circling. "Is this going to put me in danger? Actually, not theoretically?" He didn't answer immediately, which she respected more than a fast reassurance would have given her. "The Yo Tae-jin situation was the highest risk," he said carefully. "Not because of what he is, but because of the specific leverage he chose, coming at you rather than at me. That was unusual. It was also a failure on his part that has had consequences." He paused. "I won't tell you there's no risk. There is risk. What I can tell you is that I will never again make a decision that exposes you to something you didn't know about and couldn't prepare for." "That's a big promise," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She looked at him. She thought about her grandmother saying, "Fill yourself first, then give." She thought about the 3mm cut in the ivory silk that you couldn't see anymore because she'd known how to work around it. She thought about the fact that she had never once in her life built anything by only taking the safe option, and that the things she'd built by taking the harder one were the things she'd kept. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay." "Don't mistake that for easy," she said. "I'm going to hold you to every single thing you just said." "I know," he said. "I want you to." 2 years pass the way years pass when you're inside something that's genuinely growing, fast in memory, dense in the living of it. Holloway Seoul became the thing she'd believed it could be before she'd been certain it was possible. The 2nd collection was larger. The 3rd was the one that broke through internationally in the way that changes the scale of everything after it. She hired 12 people by the end of the 2nd year. She paid them well, and she didn't apologize for having standards, and she rebuilt the studio twice as the space kept being not enough. Her grandmother flew to Seoul for the 3rd collection's show. She was 78 and sharp, and she sat in the front row, and she looked at the beadwork on the pieces that carried the embroidery technique she'd taught an 8-year-old in Chicago more years ago than she wanted to count. And after the show, she held Nia's face in both her hands and said nothing, which said everything. Jun Seok kept his word. The syndicate's dismantling was slow and imperfect, and happened in stages that weren't always visible to anyone outside the process, but it happened. By the end of the third year, the criminal operations that had built the Bayo Syndicate over 3 decades had been reduced to a fraction of their original scope, with the revenue redirected into 3 legitimate enterprises: a logistics company, a technology fund, and a workforce training program in Seoul's outer districts that employed over 400 people in its first year. He told her about each stage as it happened. She listened each time. She asked specific questions. She did not pretend it was uncomplicated, and he did not ask her to. Hanmira left Seojin Group in the second year. Not a departure with drama, but a clean transition to an advisory role at a smaller firm she'd helped build from the ground. At her going-away gathering, Nia attended. They stood together near the drinks table, which felt like a kind of symmetry, and Mira looked at her with an expression that had lost most of its armor. "You made something real," Mira said. "You helped," Nia said. "Marginally," Mira said, and something in her voice was almost dry, almost warm, almost a version of the woman she might have been if things had bent differently. "More than marginally," Nia said. Mira nodded once. Then she looked across the room, not at Jun Seok, who was across the space talking to someone, but at nothing in particular. "I think I spent 11 years being in love with what he could have been instead of what he was," she said quietly. "That's a long time to be in the wrong tense." Nia didn't say anything. Sometimes the most honest thing was to just receive what someone said without filling the space after it. "The right tense looks good on you," Mira said finally. Then she moved away into the room. It was a Saturday evening in late autumn, 3 years after Nia had first landed at Incheon International with 14 pieces and everything she had. They were at the restaurant, the same one. The owner was still a friend, the table was still in the corner, and the city was still making its constant low noise beyond the windows. She'd been there enough times now that the staff knew her order without asking, which was the kind of ordinary that still caught her off guard sometimes because she hadn't expected to have ordinary here. She was telling him about something her grandmother had said on the phone that afternoon, and he was listening in the way he listened, fully, with the particular quality that made whatever you were saying feel like it was being kept somewhere safe. And then she noticed that he was quieter than usual, even for him. She stopped talking. "What?" she said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He put a ring on the table between them. It was simple, not ostentatious, nothing that announced itself. A thin band with one dark stone she didn't immediately recognize that caught the light in a way that was very quiet and very certain. She looked at it. She looked at him. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just held her eyes in that direct and unrehearsed way that had never once in 3 years felt like a performance. "I know what it cost you to stay," he said. "I know it wasn't easy and wasn't certain and wasn't something you decided once and never had to decide again. I know you made that choice more than once, the first time and then again and then again." He paused. "I'm not asking you because you've earned a reward. I'm asking you because you are the only person I have ever been fully inside a conversation with. The only person for whom I have never once had to calculate what version of myself to show." He looked at the ring, then back at her. "I'm asking because I want to build the rest of it with you. And I want to do that honestly, which is the only way either of us knows how to do anything." She looked at the ring on the table. She thought about a hallway in the Seojin Group building and a woman in perfect armor saying, "You're not the kind of woman a man like him marries," with the flat certainty of someone delivering a verdict. She thought about standing outside a boardroom and choosing to go back in. She thought about 14 pieces and a carry-on bag and a cold studio in Seongsu-dong and a 3mm cut in ivory silk that had healed invisibly. She thought about her grandmother's hands and Destiny's voice on the phone saying, "You are something else," and the silence in a room when 70 people stopped everything they were doing to look. She picked up the ring. She turned it in her fingers. The stone caught the restaurant's warm light and held it. "I need you to know," she said, "that I'm not saying yes to the man who sat across from me in that conference room 3 years ago. I'm saying yes to the one sitting in front of me now. The one who told me the truth when it cost him something. The one who's doing the slower, harder thing because it's the right thing." She looked at him. "If that person changes, if you stop being that person, I'm going to tell you, loudly." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." She put the ring on. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and neither of them said anything for a moment because there wasn't anything that needed saying. The restaurant moved around them, the quiet music, the couple at the next table, the city pressing close against the glass, and they sat inside all of it, inside the ordinary, extraordinary fact of two people who had found each other in the middle of difficult things and decided again and again to stay. The woman who had been told she was not the kind of woman a man like him marries sat across the table from the man who had chosen her, not because she'd made herself smaller or safer or more acceptable, but because she'd refused to. Because she'd stood in every hard place and been exactly who she was, and that person had turned out to be exactly enough. Not perfect. Not without cost. Not without the marks that hard years leave on people who live them honestly. But enough. Wholly, completely, finally enough.